All right. All right, everyone, welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. How's everyone doing? Good. Good weekend? Decent weekend? Did anyone see that video from the A&M game where the wide receiver was running out of bounds, almost hit the dog? It was actually pretty crazy. There was A&M played SMU, and there was a wide receiver who was running out of bounds, and the dog, Reveal, right? The guy was about to run to the dog, so when the cadet men just knocks him out of the way, and you see like tackles him off the field, which is kind of cool. I don't know, I saw the video before. I thought that was pretty cool. Let's see. Anything fun this week? Anything interesting? Anything I should know about? Anything? Nothing?
LSU got the butt kicked.
LSU, who beat them? Oh, that's not good. That's not good. That's not good. Let's see. What else? What else? Anything else interesting? No? Okay. I hope some of you were able to come to Constitution Day on Monday. We didn't have class on Wednesday, so I haven't seen all of you since, but hopefully you're able to get there and you're able to enjoy it. And if you didn't come and you didn't get a pocket Constitution, you can come to my office and I will give you one. So that will be the prize for you to come see me. But I have a free Constitution for anyone who wants one. Okay? Any questions? All right. Anyone have any issues with chain of title and the recording acts and things we did last week? We'll build upon that today. Okay. So the scope of what we're talking about today is often labeled under the umbrella of something called chain of title. This is one of those terms that is extremely difficult to understand because it means many different things. All right? Now, when we discussed chain of title in class last week, we probably referred to it as saying the sequence of events who own something, right? So if I bought it from A, and A bought it from B, and B bought it from C, and C bought it from D, that entire chain is what's often called the chain of title. But chain of title also refers to the records which you should be searching when you're doing a title search, right? So if I'm buying a house from A, I should probably check to see if A bought it. Where did A get it from, right? And if I find that A got it from B, I try to see where B got it from, okay? They're effectively the same thing. This is you're tracing as far back as you can, look at all the different elements in the chain. Where chain of title gets tricky is where it's not always obvious how a piece of property got from one party to the next. And invariably this happens when one party fails to record. Okay? Almost every single problem we have today in class is because someone somewhere in the chain of title didn't record properly or on time. If everyone records on time, you can paint a complete picture of how something got from A to B to C. If you record on time, it makes fraud very difficult because anyone doing an independent title search can check to see where a person got something from. But if you do not record, this creates a lot of confusion. This allows fraud to perpetuate because someone can sell the same piece of property multiple times. If no one records it, there'll be no record of it. All right, any questions? All right, so take a look at example 7. It's on page 677. All right. What we have here is a somewhat muddled and murky situation where various people transfer the same piece of property. All right, so let's start. Daniela, we start with you. 677, please.
Oh, okay.
You see example 7?
Yeah.
Just read it, please. Thank you. No, it's okay.
O conveyed to A, who does not record. O conveyed to B, who records the A to B. O conveyed to C, the purchaser for value who has no actual knowledge of the deeds from O to A and from A to B. He records.
Okay. All right. So here's the situation, right? This is your typical question. You have one person, O, who is a fraud. Okay? I promise you on the exam, I promise you, someone will convey the same piece of property to 2 different people. I promise you. You always have someone who tries to commit fraud. It's in every single property question. What makes these fraudsters viable is when people don't record, right? Because it says O conveys to A and A doesn't record. Okay? Had A recorded that deed, could O have then sold it to C? What do you think, Danielle? You're shaking your head no. Say pretend A did the right thing. He recorded. Would C have bought it? How come? That's right. Okay. If A had recorded, he would record the transaction as from O to A, right? Where would O's name have appeared, Zugi? Where would you find O's name?
Under the grantee.
Who is the seller?
The seller is O.
So which book would that have been in?
Grantor.
Good. Okay, good. Remember, grantee is the receiver, grantor is the giver. Remember me? Okay. So if C is buying it from O, C would search for O's name everywhere imaginable. And if you search for O in the grantor index, you would find that O gave it to A. And if C finds that O already sold it to A, he's not going to buy it because he knows this is fraud. This is not good. Everyone see that? All right, but that's not what happened here. We see that A doesn't record. And what happens is O sells it to A, then A sells it to B. Okay? This A to B deed is recorded. Okay? But Alex, is there any way for C to even know about A or B? Would he even know to search for either of those names?
That's not recorded.
Well, the A to B deed is recorded.
Oh.
But my question is, would C even know to look for A or B? Would that?
A would be the original grantee book, but he would be in this grantee book.
Well, forget about the books for a second. If I'm C, right, I'm buying it from O. What names am I looking for in the books? What's the only name I know to look for?
O.
That's right, O. Would I even know to look for A or B? That's right. If I'm C, right, I'm the subsequent buyer, and this guy O is selling it to me, I wouldn't even know to look for A or B. Everyone see that? That's what we mean by chain of title, right? If I'm O, the only name I would know to look for is if I'm C, the only name I'd look for was O. I wouldn't even know about A or B. So we say that A and B are outside the chain of title, right? That I'm not obligated to find the A and B. Everyone see that? Okay? So the question in the last sentence says, is the A to B deed properly recorded to give constructive notice to the world? What do you think the answer to that question is, Stephen?
Really not.
How come?
It's not because any subsequent buyer will never know of the deed between A and B.
That's right.
Well,
No, that's right.
unless
There's but A and B, so that it's not sufficient for constructive notice. Everyone see that? Okay. Questions on that? So what you're trying to figure out, right, is if I'm a reasonable buyer, what can I know about, right? What are the different people that I could look up in the different books? And if I don't even know about A or B, I can't even look that name up. You raising a hand? Shmira?
Never mind.
Never mind? Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the first case, the Juliet versus a drywall case. Okay? And actually, I have a map that might be second. All right, so Blaine, let's walk me through what happened. What happened in the Juliet case?
So, basically, there's a few transactions that happen, and this guy tries to buy a lot, and the deed doesn't record.
You gotta go start from the beginning. Walk me through the facts.
Okay.
Facts here are kind of important.
Okay. So there's a subdivision.
Uh-huh.
I guess that's the.
Ah. Oh, well, good time division. That's right.
And then there are restrictions in the subdivision, basically to prevent people from doing anything other than single-family homes.
Okay, good.
And so.
But let's be very precise. there's subdivision. There are restrictions on what can be built. But Blaine, where are these restrictions written down? Be very precise.
In the contract?
No. David, where are these restrictions actually written down?
They were. I thought it was the contract for sale, but
To whom?
to the between the landowner selling it to the developer and the developer selling it to the initial homeowner.
Okay, good. That's right. So the difficulty in this case, right, is we have this subdivision with many different plots of land. And there are a number of different grants from the original developer to different people, okay? One of the first grants sold makes reference to this plan, right, these restrictions. And among these restrictions are you can't build anything other than a one-bedroom house, okay? Claire, did all of the different deeds from the same developer have these restrictions written in them?
No.
They didn't. Did some of them make reference to them?
They made reference to a provision, but not the actual.
And did some of the deeds say anything at all, maybe nothing at all about this? Good. So the problem here was that one of the deeds, let's call it the master deed, right? The master deed, the first one out, listed all these different restrictions. Subsequent deeds said, oh, you have to abide by this plan, but they don't really mention what the plan is. But the deed sold to our defendant was silent. It made no reference to any restrictions on the land. Everyone see the issue? Okay. So the question is, should Drywall have been on notice that maybe they can't build an apartment building, right? Should something have been in their chain of title, may we say? Should there have been something to tip them off that this was not the right thing to do? Everyone see what I'm talking about? All right, so before we get to the deeds, let's talk about something a little bit more basic. Everyone understand what the idea of a development is, where you have one huge plot of land, the owner divides into little chunks, right? And he sells off the chunks. Excuse me. Very often, these lands, we'll study later in the semester, have restrictions put on them. And the goal is, they effectively want all the houses to look roughly the same. Everyone know what I'm talking about? You have these private communities, they're often gated, and every house looks exactly the same house, the same floors, the same driveway, the same everything, right? This is deliberate, okay? So before we even get to the deeds, this is actually a Google map of the place. You can see here that every single house on the block is a one-bedroom home, right? Let's see. Michelle, if you were a developer, right, and you bought a piece of land, and every single house in the block is a one-bedroom home, and you know the same grantor gave the land to everyone, you think you might be on notice that something's up? Why?
I mean, it's all uniform. Everything, all the construction's uniform. Obviously, they had a set plan to the area. It's not going to be a commercially big development.
Right. Okay. So before we even get to the issue of whether there was constructive notice in the deeds, if you're living in a place where every single house in the same development is a one-bedroom house, that should probably tip you off that maybe you shouldn't be building an apartment building there, right? Putting aside anything about deeds. So this idea of constructive notice is often very broad, right? Even if there's nothing in your paperwork to indicate what you can and can't do, if you're in a residential community, this might put you on notice that, wait a minute, maybe something's up, right? Maybe something, I can't build this here, right? You might not know the details, but you have some duty to seek further. Okay? Everyone get that? All right. But the case we have here, the guy was being dense, and in fact, he actually found out about it. Like, he learned of the fact that he couldn't build this development. He did it anyway, right? So, Kelsey, what did he try to argue about why he wasn't bound by these restrictions?
Because it wasn't in his
Okay, it wasn't in his specific deed, right? Exactly. He claims, hey, look, it wasn't in my deed. Bless you. It wasn't in my deed. I did all my homework. I did all my research. I'm not bound by it. Right, everyone see that? Okay. So, Hugo, what did then the court say in response to that? Did he have any duty to seek further knowledge?
Yeah.
Yeah. How come?
Because I guess it would be impossible.
No. What? How? So Drywall says, you know, it would have been impossible for me to know about this because it wasn't my deed. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay. How could he have found out about this? How? What? Let me put it this way. We start again from the premise that we have this subdivision, right, where you have one common grantor chopped up the land into a lot of different pieces, right? When he's doing a title search, whose name should he be looking up in the books?
The common grantor.
Yeah, the guy who sold it to him, right? And is he just looking up his division, or is he looking at all the divisions on the block? Okay. So here's the trick, right? He knew that one grantor gave the land to all these people on the block, you know, this one, this one, this one, this one. What would have stopped him from doing a title search on each individual piece of property? Right? If he had done a title search from the original grantor for this one, this one, this one, this one, what would he have found, Hugo? He would have found at least one, right? The master one, the first one, with this restriction on it. And that might have been enough to put him on notice that, wait a minute, if these 2 or 3 have these restrictions on it, maybe mine does also.
What about the cost involved?
Ah, okay, good. So, Stephanie, what's the downside to putting this burden on the owner to do all these searches?
It would just be time consuming, basically looking for an attractive land.
Right. Oh, exactly. So you said 2 things that are correct. So first of all, this will be really easy with the tract index, right, where each piece of land is numbered. But those are fairly rare. Most jurisdictions, you have the grantor-grantee index. So this is really difficult. So if you are buying a piece of property in development, not only do you have to do a title search on your land, you have to do a title search on every single adjacent property. Now, what makes this actually not that bad is there's only one common grantor, right? You know the name of the original person who sold all the land, so you're only searching for one name. So it's not that bad. But imagine if the same piece of property had been around for 50 years, and there have been 10 or 15 different common grantors, right? That's a lot of work. Rebecca, does the court seem concerned about the burden imposed by all this additional searching?
No, not at all.
Yeah, not at all. How come?
They said that according to their statutes, they require them to look through the grantors and grantees and not the tract indexes, which community
Right. So effectively, the goal of this, methodology is to ensure that restrictions are enforced, right? So if you have a common grantor and he puts these restrictions on it, they're enforced. Now, I mean, really though, Maria, isn't the grantor at fault here for not putting these terms in every deed? Explain.
Well, he put them, it was in the original one, so they should have, it goes down.
Yeah. I mean, what I don't get about this case, and the court didn't seem to address, is the grantor messed up here, right? He was the one selling the land. He was the one subdividing it. Why isn't it his fault that he forgot to put these terms in here? Why are you punishing Drywall when the original grantor failed to put these terms in every contract? The court doesn't seem too concerned about that, which would seem to be a big issue in my mind. So in other words, they are now putting the burden on the prospective buyer to check how the community is laid out and to maintain the integrity and the consistency of this neighborhood. All right, everyone see that? Questions on this case? Not too bad, right? Right, so look around. If everything's the same, that's probably a good hint that there's some restriction on it, especially if it's in an enclosed community. Okay. Let's take a look at question number 9, example 9. It's on page 683. There it is, right at the top. Can you read that, please, Angela? Oh, I'm sorry, not Angela. I'm one row ahead. Sorry, Brooke. Sorry, jump to row.
A conveys Blackacre to B by a general warranty deed. B records. A subsequently acquires title to Blackacre from O. A records the deed from O to A. And A then conveys Blackacre to C, a purchaser for value who has no actual knowledge of deeds made. C records the conveyance.
Okay, so again, we have the situation where multiple people are conveying, right, without proper recording. So we begin. A conveys Blackacre to B by general warranty deed. Okay, so B records that. Okay, so if for whatever reason after that you're buying anything from B, you would know about A. Okay, but that's not what happens. After A sells it to B, we find that A actually acquired Blackacre from O. So again, we have the cheating bastard here, right? A sold it before he owned it. And this isn't as crazy as you think. This actually happens a lot, where someone buys a piece of land from someone, and they use that money to actually buy it for themselves in the first place. That way they make the transaction kind of like complete. Okay? So A acquires title to Blackacre from O. Okay? So now A records a deed from O. All right, so let me ask you this question, Brooke. When B bought it from A, should B have been on the alert that something was up?
Yeah.
What should B have known?
Because when he went into the guarantee index, he should have seen that A never granted.
That's right. Everyone see that. When B initially bought it, there was no record of A ever having it. Right? Now, A gave him a general warranty deed. You might remember these are like the gold standard. These have all the insurance on it. So, you know, B said, you know what? Screw it. If he gives me a bad deed, he'll cover my losses. Not always a smart strategy, but maybe that was his approach. Okay. So now we know the deeds are recorded. Okay. So now, after A bought it from O, A conveys it to C. Okay. Let's see. Lamar, is there anything that C would know to put C on suspicion? Is there any reason why C might know about what happened before?
If he does a title search, he'll find that and looks at the grantee index.
Right.
Won't he find B in there since he recorded it?
Yes. Okay, so let's walk through this one step at a time, right? If you're C, right, the only name you know is A, right? You know that A gave it to you. If you start searching through the books, you'll find that at some point A also conveyed it to B, and A also bought it from O later. The fact is, you see that A is a crook, right? You see that A is conveyed to someone else before. So this deed is actually sufficient notice for you to know what's up. So in this case, Lamar, who wins? B or C?
B.
B. Why does B win?
Because he recorded it first.
Not because he recorded it first. Be very careful. This has nothing to do with who records first. This is the tricky part. Why does C lose?
Because A did not have title to convey from him?
Is C let's go on to Heath. There it is. Yeah. Heath, is C a bona fide purchaser for value?
No, because he had constructive notice.
Exactly. Heath. So what okay, again, so why is C not a BFP, bona fide purchaser for value? What did C not do correctly?
He didn't look at these.
Yes. You have an obligation to search for as much as you can, right? You have an obligation to search for as many different names as you can think of within reason. And if there's one name that you can think of and you don't search it, you now are not a bona fide purchaser. You're assumed to have had constructive notice, and you can't take if you had notice. This is the same thing last week, right? If someone knew that a property was fraudulently obtained and they buy it anyway, tough luck. You're out of luck. The recording statutes only work if you do not have notice, right? That's why I jumped at Lamar when he started talking about a recording statute. Those only work when there's no notice. Here, there's constructive notice.
But why is B a bona fide person? Like if he had some notice that something was up.
Okay, so let's be very precise here. You're right. When B bought it, he saw something was up, right? How do we know that perhaps when A got it, his deed just wasn't ever recorded? Ah. So that doesn't mean there's fraud. If B looked up and find that A never had it, maybe A never recorded his deed, or maybe it was lost or burned. That's why he got the general warranty deed to cover his losses. What makes this situation different is that A is now conveyed to two different people. This isn't a case of a missing deed. This is a situation where there's obvious fraud going on, where the same piece of property has been sold twice. That's a no-no, right? If you see a missing deed with something called a wild card, a gap, that's not necessarily means you're at fault. That means something maybe burned down or whatever. But here, if there are two recorded deeds, it's a no-no. Yes, ma'am.
So a bona fide purchaser is someone that purchases something when they don't have notice that it's fraud.
Yes.
They have any type of notice of it.
Yes. And that's actual notice or constructive notice. Either one works. Right? Actual notice means you actually know, or constructive notice means like you can piece different, like a puzzle, right? You can piece different pieces together, connect the dots, and decide what's wrong, right? All right, everyone see that? Everyone okay with that? Questions on that? The trick is, if you are able to have constructive notice, you're no longer a BFP. And if you're not a BFP, you can't take advantage of the recording statute. Right? You can't take advantage of the notice recording statute. You lose. Because usually we say the BFP without notice wins, but you have notice, so you're not a BFP. All right. Any questions on this before we move forward? Let's take a look at page 685. There are a bunch of questions. All right. Let's see. Daniel, start reading question number 2, please.
So, on land where a conveyance is given, each conveyance is by one. Each person is a bona fide purchaser except as otherwise indicated. The jurisdiction is only a grant.
Okay, stop for a second. Thank you. I'll come back to you in a second. All right, so what we have here is a number of different, somewhat complicated transactions. I'm going to walk through this with you one step at a time, right? So we start with O owns the land, and we're using all warranty deeds. Okay. All right. So Daniel, start reading, please.
A conveys to B, but it's not recorded.
Okay. By the way, we're dealing with the same piece of land, right? Okay. So A conveys to B. B isn't recorded. Does A actually own the land at this point?
No.
Okay. Now, next sentence. O conveys to A, which does not record. Does A own the land now? Okay. Still yet, there have been no recordings, right? So as far as anyone in the world's concerned at this point, O still owns it, right? If anyone in check, O would still own Blackacre. Okay, Daniel, next sentence. Please read it.
B conveys to C, who records.
Okay. So if you're C, right, and you're buying it from B, what are you thinking if you're C buying it from B? No. If you're C, where would you find B's name in any of the record books? You wouldn't. So would you still buy it from him?
Shouldn't.
You shouldn't. But is there any indication that there's any fraud going on at this point?
No.
Not necessarily. For all we know, O gave it to C. O gave it to B, and it was just never recorded. Okay. Okay. So next sentence, Daniel.
A conveys to D, who records. D is shown to be recorded to A.
Okay. So here, D knows that O gave it to A. Daniel, does D know anything about B?
No.
Okay, that's right. D would have no way of knowing about B because B never B was not in his chain of title. Okay? And then, as if to make it even worse, the last one, O conveys it to E, who records. And Daniel, would E have any reason to be suspicious about this one?
Yes, because he conveyed it to, or A had conveyed it to D and it's been recorded.
Right. But what's the link between O and A?
There isn't one.
Ah. I want to see this. E would have no reason to know about any of the above. The only name he has O. Look at this very carefully. Not a single deed from O had ever been recorded until now. So even E would have no knowledge that of any of the chicanery that went on above. Isn't this messed up? Right? Okay. Everyone with me so far? All right. So other Daniel, thank you, Daniel. Daniel H. Let me ask you this question. At each step, was anyone at fault? Did anyone at any step was aware that there was some sort of fraud going on, or should anyone have been aware?
Besides the grantor?
Except for O, he doesn't count.
No.
Okay, so effectively everyone, no one had constructive notice, right? Everyone get that? Not one of them had any constructive notice. So they're all BFPs, right? So Daniel, in a notice jurisdiction, who wins, right? Who prevails?
The first person to get notice?
No, not the first. Who wins? No, that's race. In a notice jurisdiction, who wins? Go back to your notes from last week. Yeah, Clement, who wins in a notice jurisdiction? Generally speaking, don't give me a name. In a notice jurisdiction, who wins?
Person who has an actual.
No, Zoe?
So it's this subsequent
Yes.
purchaser, as long as they don't have notice, so it would be whoever purchased it last, as long as they
Exactly.
didn't have notice.
And who here was last? Exactly. Under a notice statute, we did this last week, the subsequent bona fide purchase for value without notice. In other words, the last person to buy it without notice wins. Everyone see that? Under a notice statute, the subsequent BFP, the last buyer without notice, wins. So in this case, each of these parties took it without any notice. The last one in the pile is E. After all this fraud, E is now the rightful owner of the land under a notice statute.
What about C and D? They recorded. They did what they could.
And they got screwed because they weren't last. So let me ask you, Adam. Let's say this last. I'm gonna cross this last one out, right? On the last transaction. So the last one was A to D. Who would be the owner in that case? Right. If again I cross out the last one.
I guess D would be
Exactly. Why is D the winner? It's always the last buyer to take without notice. Everyone see that?
But is there any remedy for the people who bought?
They can sue for fraud the seller, right? So for example, D could sue A for fraud, right? Because he didn't have it properly obtained, right? C can sue B for fraud, right? Everyone can sue for fraud, but in this class we're not so much concerned with fraud, we're concerned with who owns the land. All that stuff is tort. That's a secondary issue. Yes.
So you could sue B for fraud even though B, unlike O and A, had no notice and thought that he had good title to the land.
Could C sue B for fraud?
'Cause I mean,
Actually, you're right. No, the fraudster would be A. B would not be in fraud. You're right. Yeah, so they could sue A for fraud, but not B.
so
In fact, C could probably sue A through proxy because he defrauded B. Yeah. Eventually, in other words, let me be precise, right? C would sue B, right? But B would then bring A into the situation because A misfrauded him. So eventually, everything would pile onto A at the very end of the day because A started this entire chain of fraud. Questions?
Can't be confused.
That's okay.
So you said they can sue A for fraud.
Right.
B can sue A for fraud,
Yes.
or just
Yes. B could sue A because when A bought it from B, A didn't own it yet. Remember? A didn't have it in the first transaction. He got it in the second transaction. So this transaction here, A conveys to B, that was fraud because A didn't own it. So B could sue A for that one. Got that? Yeah.
So could C also sue A?
So what would happen is C would sue B and B would implead A. Okay. In other words, he wouldn't sue him directly, but he would bring him into the transaction. Your hand up? Yeah.
If D is shown the deed from O to A, would he do anything at that point to make this recorded? A recorded deed?
Well, D can't record that deed. It'd be for A to record. Right? And then the question is very deliberate. He shows him the deed, which was never recorded. So no one else but him could know about this. All right? Also, and to be candid, if D is being shown all those deeds, he probably should have been shown a couple other ones too. That would show that something else was amiss. So that was a serious misrepresentation or concealment of some sort. All right. Yeah. Yes, the grantee records, always. And if you remember from last week, you record in both books. Good questions, good questions. When you ask me questions, I know you're actually getting it, which makes me happy. Other questions? All right, let's try letter B. Okay. What was I up to? Oh, I guess you're up. Tim, start reading. Let's walk through letter B one at a time. And again, it's the same setup as before. O is the original owner. Okay, so read the first sentence.
O conveys to A who does not record.
Okay, so in this one, in this question, O is a fraudster, right? The original grantor is a fraudster. So O conveys to A, and at this point, the owner would be A, but it keeps going. So next sentence.
O conveys to B, who knows the deed from O to A and does not record.
Okay, so O gives it to B. Tim, he knows about the previous deed. Is he a subsequent bona fide for purchaser with that notice? That's right.
He's trying to be shady too.
Yeah, some shady, right? When you know about the previous grant and you know something's up and you buy it anyway, you're taking advantage of the system. Okay? Now, Tim, next one, please.
O conveys to C, who does not record.
Okay. Is there any way for C to know about what just happened, about any of the above? No. The reason why is because none of them were recorded. The only name that C knows is O. O can't find that name. I'm sorry. Neither of these two deeds are recorded. So right now, C is a BFP, right? C is a BFP. Okay? All right, Tim, next one.
B conveys to D, who does not record. D is showing the deed from O to B.
Okay. So again, we have this selective knowledge, right? Where B says, hey, look, I got this deed, never recorded, right? So, Tim, would D be on any notice that something was amiss? Would D have any knowledge anything's up? That's right. D has no knowledge anything's up because the only deed he knows about is the one from O to B, which happened up there. He doesn't know about the other deeds. Okay? So then they all start recording in sequence. Now, don't worry about the race notice. Let's do the notice first. And the reason why I say that is because in a notice jurisdiction, it doesn't matter who records first, right? That's the entire crux of the notice jurisdiction. The notice jurisdiction, as we said before, is when the subsequent buyer takes without notice. The recording actually doesn't matter so much. All right, so Trey, let's walk through this, right? Who do you think here, under a notice statute, wins?
Well, B.
Let's rank them. Okay, let's do this, right? So we have A, B, C, or D, right? Who has the worst claim to all these? What do you think?
Well, D, because they know that there's a.
What does D know? Be very precise. What does D know when D buys it? What's the only thing he was shown?
From D from O to B. There's no way for him to know if that is recorded or not.
Does it matter though?
Yeah.
Why?
Well,
Let's try. Hold on, Joseph. Okay. When D buys, does he buy it in good faith? Is he a BFP?
No.
Why? When I think we did this.
Because he saw that it went from O.
And what's the problem with that?
There isn't.
Ah, good. You walked yourself into the right answer. That's right. You changed it, which is good. D is good faith, right? D is good faith because when he bought it, he had no knowledge of anything that happened with O. He had no knowledge of C, right? Joseph, who's the last buyer to buy in good faith in this entire chain? The last person to buy it in good faith. Yes.
Wouldn't know about the other one.
Good. So under a notice jurisdiction, who wins here?
Maybe the second to the last.
No, not second to last.
Oh, the last person.
Yes.
About it, so
Who wins under a notice, generally speaking?
the last person.
The last,
The
not-
last one,
the last BFP, right? Under a notice jurisdiction, the last BFP wins. And Joseph, you said it right. In this case, who's the last BFP? Good. Everyone see that? It's a little tricky. The answer to the race notice, I'm not going to spend more time on it. The answer is A, because A was the first to record without notice. It's something of a weird result, but A records. Hey, Zoe.
And I just think that the thing with the notice thing, like in a situation like this, wouldn't that just be completely not fair? Because I mean,
Yes.
A actually got good title to it, and then D didn't get good title, and they're the one who gets it.
Well, that's why in a race notice, A would win, right? Because A didn't have notice, and he was the first to record. But notice jurisdiction is not very fair. And we discussed this last week. Notice it's not a fair jurisdiction. Okay.
But if D was the first to record in a race notice thing, he'd still win,
That's
even
right.
though he technically doesn't have good. He never got good title conveyed to him, and A did.
Well, what do you mean good title? Using that word a little bit loosely. Why isn't it a good title?
Because B never had a title to it because he wasn't he didn't purchase it, right?
Well, when you use the word good title, it's a little bit misleading. The recording statute makes it a good title, right? What makes something a good title is the recording statute. The recording statute says if you're the last person to buy without notice, then you have good title. It's not fair. It isn't, but that's not how our record system works.
I mean, what if you were in, say, just a plain old notice thing, and you
You mean race?
no, just plain old notice, and you've had a property for years, and say it's a summer home, you live on there in the summer. Someone comes there in the winter, and someone you don't even know says, "I own this property here. Let me sell it to you."
Well, let's hope you have title insurance, right? I mean, we'll do this later in the reading, but let's hope you have a general warranty deed with title insurance, and you can go out to the original seller. It's not fair, right? It isn't. But these things often aren't.
But could they still kick you out of your home because of it?
Yes.
Just because some random person lied about having title to it?
Well, let's be precise. Yeah, let's be precise, right? If there was no way of you knowing about it, right, then you're still out of luck because you're not the last bona fide person for value. So basically, yes, it isn't. It ain't fair.
Even if there's someone who knows that they don't own this land, never got this land conveyed to them,
Well, if you know, then you have some notice.
well, no, the seller, the fake seller knows that they never got.
Right. So then they can sue the seller for fraud. It's not a good remedy, I know, and it's not fair.
Doesn't that mean that just any dishonest person could get someone to kick you out of your house?
But if you had recorded, then it wouldn't matter. If you recorded in the first place.
Well, no, that's not what Zoe's asking. It's someone before her didn't record. right? Everything that matters is what happens when you bought it. If when you bought it there wasn't proper recordation,
You can look at the title so you can record.
yeah, but you wouldn't know which name to look for. That's the issue. The issue in this case, right? And Zoe's asking about B, right, or A.
Not just that. No, I'm asking, what if everybody in your chain properly recorded and someone completely and totally unrelated decided to sell this property and, I don't know, forged some fake deed to this other guy?
Well, then there's fraud, right?
Yeah, I know, but
But
the
hold
other
on,
guy wanted something
hold on, no.
fake.
If everyone recorded, then you can find the person's a fraudster. This problem only emerges if people don't record, right? If everyone records, you can figure out the chain. If people
But
don't
if
record,
you
you're out of
can
luck.
If you can only search by grantor and grantee, then the guy who buys it from this fraudster doesn't know any of the names involved.
And that's the problem we have here. It's not fair. I'm sorry. All right. Any other questions? Yeah.
What was the answer to race notice jurisdiction on?
I think A wins because he recorded first with that notice. Don't want to walk through that too much time, but yeah. Other questions? All right, let's do the Daniels versus Anderson. Okay, and this case is a little bit of a different issue. This is a case where at the time the transaction began, the buyer was a BFP. But as payments were made on the contract, his status as a BFP became much less clear. What was I up to? Okay, so now Angela, what were the facts in Daniels, please?
Daniels had bought two lots from Dracula, but he also had the right of first refusal.
Yeah, what does that mean, right of first refusal?
So, like, if he wanted to buy the other lot, he had to put him on notice.
Yeah, right. So basically what a right of first refusal is saying to someone, listen, excuse me, I'm not, thank you, I'm not going to buy a piece of land now, but if you ever find someone who wants to come buy it from you, whatever the price they offer, give me that same offer and I'll buy it first. This often happens when there's several pieces of property in a row, and maybe someone might want to expand. They get this right of first refusal, the right to say no first. All right, Angela, continue, please.
And so the seller, Daniels, didn't do that, though.
Okay.
He sold it to someone else. And
Yeah, Zographos, with these excellent names, Zographos, right? So Daniels is Zographos. What happened next?
he didn't give him notice, and so the guy was like paying on it until he like paid up to like $40,000.
And then what happened?
And then Daniel's wife told
always the wives, right? Always the wives always get people in poor wives. So here's what happened, right? There was an installment contract of some sort, which means you pay at some regular intervals. When Zographos began paying off the contract, it wasn't clear that this right of refusal existed. He would have no way to even know about it. But at some point, the wife finds out, and presumably the wife tells the husband. Even after he knew that this right of first refusal was there, he continued making payments and paid off the land, right? So, Garrett, if he had known about this right of refusal at the outset, would he have been a BFP?
No.
That's right. If he had known about this at the outset, he would not be a BFP because he had noticed that there was some sort of cloud over the title, right? In other words, if there's a right of first refusal, the other person has the right to refuse it first. All right? But now what happens if he finds out later during the course of the transaction?
It turns out that the courts are split on how to do it.
Okay, good. So explain how the courts are split, please.
Well, the courts are split into three common methods of dealing with it. The most common, the first, which I believe is applied in this case, is that all the money is essentially paid back to the buyer, and then they lose any interest that they have developed.
Okay, good. What are the other options?
The second is that we awarded the buyer's awarded a fractional interest in the land proportional to what he paid. And the third method is to allow the buyer to complete the purchase, but to pay the remaining installments to the holder of the outstanding.
Okay, good. So Garrett's right. There's something of a split. I don't really care so much that you know about the split and which courts go which way. I'm more interested in explaining the different rationales why. So let's walk through these. So here at some point, right, he'd already paid more than half the amount of money for the installment contract, and he discovers that there's this right of first refusal. Okay, what happens now? So, I mean, one option, perhaps the most drastic one, would be to actually transfer the land to Jacula. Jacula had the right of first refusal. Okay, if you transfer the land to Jacula, what happens to that $40,000 already paid? Well, presumably Jacula would have to pay it back and even it out. The other option is perhaps just to pay some sort of difference between the two. Okay, I don't really care if you know which way the court comes down, but the difficulty with this case is he still a BFP, right? At what point did he no longer become a BFP? We'll do a case in a few minutes, which is a little bit different. But let's see, Shamira, do you think it's fair that you can start off not being a BFP, and then at some point you start off as a BFP, then you lose that status? What do you think about that?
Not fair.
Why not?
Because, like you said, you already paid money on it. Some of the discussion says you probably sold your house, you probably made all these drastic changes.
So what was he supposed to do, right? What happens if Zagrafos finds out halfway through that, oh, there's this right of first refusal? What is he supposed to do? Move out? Leave? I mean, what would his option even be? I'm sorry? Well, what happens if he stops payments? He's living there. What's he going to do?
Investigate. Go.
You see the difficulty. Eric, what's the guy supposed to do?
Could you ask the person with the right to loan to
Good. Right. So think about this, right? The dude has a right of first refusal. What if Zagrafos wants it? Hey, listen, I'm on this land. I didn't know. Let me buy out your right of first refusal. Right? Let me buy out your right of first refusal. I'm already paid in. Or, how about this? I'll sell it to you so you can have it. Okay? So there are a couple options. Zagrafos did neither of these. He pretended like nothing was wrong. And that's why I think he got in trouble, right? In property, it's always better to try and do the right thing than to pretend nothing's wrong, because you always get screwed over. Okay. Questions on this? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the correct thing to have done, and if he did the correct thing, would have made into your book, right? But the correct thing to have done would have been to first tell the seller, contact the guy, the right of first refusal, and try and negotiate a way to work this out. Saying, listen, I'll buy out your right of first refusal, or I'm going to sue for fraud the seller, and we're going to try and figure a way to manage this. But he just pretended nothing was wrong, and that's where you get in trouble. Okay. Okay. The next case. Question. Yeah, we will do gentrification. We will. We'll do an entire day on that when we discuss a case called Mount Laurel from New Jersey. So stay tuned for that. All right. So the next case presents the different way of looking at this. So Artemio, what happened in Lewis versus Superior Court?
A couple bought a house shipping for $2.3 million, and they made a down payment about $300,000 or so, and then they paid the rest of the balance. However, about a year later, they come to find out that there's a lawsuit from a film company.
Yeah.
And it come to find out that the lawsuit was recorded the day 5 days before it was paid off.
Yeah.
But however, the lawsuit wasn't in there.
Yes. Okay. Good.
So after the.
Good. All right. So this is a case where it comes down to days, where something's recorded but not indexed properly. So let me walk you through the timeline here. I think it'll help. By the way, a phrase that you may have heard before, lis pendens. Pendens, like pending. If someone sues you, right? Say someone sues me, and then there's a lawsuit that's kind of, in proceedings, and it takes a couple of years. That person who sues me can actually file and record on my property this lis pendens saying, hey, just so you know, there's a lawsuit against Blackman, right? And if for whatever reason Blackman loses, this property is probably going to be subject to the damages, right? We will be taking money from this. So if someone has any valuable assets that might be the subject of a judgment, you put this lis pendens. It's almost like a lien, if you will, but the difference is it's still pending. I mean, I might win the case. All right, so here's the sequence, right? So at some point in February of '92, they signed a contract for $2.3 million, right? Okay. On February 23rd, right, Fontana, who's the guy who owns the debt, records the lis pendens. Oops, I can't spell. So that was on February 23rd. Okay. Now it's recorded, but it wasn't indexed. And let me explain the difference of those two. Recording means you literally bring it to the office and fill out the paperwork. But there has to be a clerk who writes it in the book or types in the computer, whatever it is. You know, if you ever go to DMV, you hand in paperwork, they mail your license in 4 to 6 weeks, whatever, right? Governments don't move very fast. Okay. Okay, so on February 25th, Lewis pays Shipley $350K. All right, so back up top. All right, so John, on the 25th, right, when Lewis paid the $350,000, would there have been anything in his power that he could have done to know about this lawsuit?
Yeah, I did in the index, so I was gonna.
So on the 25th, he sends his agent to the office, and he researches everything. Would there have been anything in the book on the 25th about this? That's right. So is he a BFP at this point? He's a BFP, okay? Good. Please.
So is that the county clerk's office?
Yes.
It's their fault that it wasn't indexed?
It wasn't their fault. It wasn't
They're
their
without fault. It's a government agency.
They're never at fault. They're the government. I'm being mostly facetious, but they're not at fault. It's in the book when it's in the book. So even if you do your damnedest to get it recorded as soon as possible, it takes them a week to record it, you're SOL, right? You're out of luck. All right, so let's look at the next step on this chain, right? Right? So again, on the 28th, there's a closing and the deed recorded. And there's a $2 million note, right? So, Derek, at this point, when the deed's recorded on the 28th, right, is there any indication about this lis pendens? There's nothing yet, okay? And then, frickin' leap year, right? February 29th, the lis pendens that was recorded a few days earlier is indexed. Okay, so now, Derek, is there notice about this pending lawsuit? Okay, so here's the deal, right? When you are paying off a house, right? You're buying a house, Catherine. Generally speaking, when are you expected to go to the records office to do your homework? Right. Are you supposed to go to the records office and search on this every single time you make a payment? Okay, good. Generally speaking, if you're a normal human being, you do a title search at the very beginning, and then each time you mail your monthly payment, you're not going to do another title search. Right? In this case, had someone continued doing title searches, they would have found this lis pendens, and they could have sued for fraud or whatever, right? But that didn't happen here. Okay? So the lease was paid off the next month. They paid off the note, right? And then they did some renovations and whatever. And then in 1993, the Lewises are served in the lawsuit. All right. So the question here, which is a somewhat different answer than the last one, right, Alex? Were the Lewises BFPs? Were the Lewises buyers of that notice that this other judgment was there? Yes, why? Why does the court say they are? That's correct. But had they finished paying it off? Does that matter? That's right. What the court says here, and this is different than the case we did 2 minutes ago, right, is it doesn't matter if they paid it off or not. They bought the property, they did their homework, right? They did a title search at the outset. The court says it would be ridiculous to impose a duty for every single time to make a payment to conduct another title search. That would be very wasteful and cumbersome. So the exact opposite, right, of the case we did a couple minutes ago. Usually when people buy a house, they assume that it's theirs. When they do a title search, they assume things aren't going to change. Okay? Now, what makes this case a little bit different, right? He did receive notice ultimately, right? But when did he receive notice, Haley? When did the Lewises actually find out about this lis pendens? Yeah, and they were already sued, right? So effectively, they only got notice of this when they were sued, and of course, that's not sufficient, right? We're not gonna punish them. Okay. Questions on this one? Effectively, what the court says here is it's too much of a burden to make them do a title search every single time to make a payment. All right. Questions? Yeah.
No very cast the case, but isn't Daniel's the other guy?
Drywall?
Yeah, Drywall. Didn't he argue that he had equitable title? He argued that earlier. Did that work?
What do you mean?
What he was saying.
Yeah, let's go to the next one. I think that might be.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I think that's what you're thinking of. Okay. All right. Any questions before we move on? Yeah.
So in this one, in Lewis, they're going to penalize the judgment holder for not recording?
Yes. So what's the upshot of this one, right? Fontana has a lis pendens. You get to touch this property? Right. So again, we have a California Court of Appeals decision reversing the common law to the detriment of the creditor. This is a pattern. Again, whenever we have a California case, they're about to reverse a common law to screw over the creditor. It's without fail. Now, this might actually be a sensible ruling, but it does fit the pattern. The debtor wins. All right. Any questions on this? All right. Let's do the last case, which is kind of a tricky case, but it's interesting facts. The book lists a couple of different types of notice, which I don't know why it defines it on the very end of the reading, but anyway, so here they are. It would help to do this like 20 pages earlier, but whatever. So it lists these 3 types of notice, right? The first one's called actual notice, and this is actually there. A person has actual personal knowledge that there's some sort of conflict or some sort of judgment. Okay. Record notice is a form of constructive notice, right? Is there something I could find in the records or the books, the grantor-grantee index, right? And the last one was called inquiry notice, right? This is kind of like the Juliet versus Drywall case, right? If I see every other piece of property in this division is a one-bedroom house, one-family house, and I want to build an apartment, I might ask some questions, right? I might see if something's up. So these are different types of notice. Generally, if there's actual inquiry, it's easy enough. Record inquiry is based on the chain of title. What can you find? And inquiry notice is based on looking around and seeing what is different, and one of these things is not like the other. One of these things doesn't belong, right? Like on Sesame Street. Okay. All right. Everyone okay with that? Yeah, I don't know why they buried that note all the way at the bottom. I'll try and move it up when we discuss it next time. Okay. Let's do the last case. The facts of this case are actually kind of messy. So, Aisha, just high level, what happened here? Before we get to the dates, just generally speaking, what was the problem here?
Okay, so Susan had an farm to John Harper for life.
Uh-huh.
She had
Uh-huh.
and they lost it.
Yeah.
And hold on, this is a little confusing. So Susan dies, and she has like heirs, and then all the heirs like execute a deed to not
And then Maud gave the deed, like she used it as security for a loan.
Yeah.
Thing to Ella.
Yeah.
And then she defaulted on the loan.
Yeah.
On the loan, so Ella foreclosed on the property. And then they're basically just trying to like argue.
Okay. Good. 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 All right. So the property dispute here focuses on a story where someone transfers a piece of land, and then the deed goes missing for like 50 years, and they figure out, uh-oh, what are we supposed to do about this now? So let me type out the timeline for you, because I think it'll help make a little bit more sense. The timeline is actually a little bit messy. So in February of 22, right, Susan gives to Maud a life estate and the remainder in fee simple to Maud's children. Actually, it's a fee simple to the property with students this morning. Aren't you glad you're not doing that anymore? Honestly, isn't this better than the fee simple stuff? I tell them there's light at the end of the tunnel. Okay. So in February, Susan gives to Maud a life estate and remainder. Okay. So as you know, when you have a life estate, flashback to last semester, you only have it for your natural life, and once you die, it goes to someone else. Okay. At some point, Susan dies. Okay. And the deed goes missing. So there's no proof that the farm belongs to Susan. So what happened at some point in 1928, right, 3 out of 4 of Susan's heirs made a grant to Susan. Okay. Now, Katie, what interest or what estate did the heirs give to Susan? Was it a fee simple or was it life estate? What was it? No. What did the heirs give? Yes. Okay. So while initially only a life estate was given, the kids gave a fee simple, right? And in this deed, they reference the previous one. So you see the problem here, right? Susan only gave a life estate. Maud was given a fee simple, right? So the difficulty here is, can Susan's heirs convey something greater than what Susan gave in the first place? Right? So Adam, does the fact that the deed disappeared means it's no longer effective? That's right. Just because the deed vanished doesn't mean it's not effective. In fact, as between Maud and Susan, you don't even need a recorded deed, right? So at this time, Adam, what estate did actually Susan have?
I mean, Susan was the one who conveyed.
I'm sorry, what estate did Maud have at this time?
She had a life.
Okay, so really at this point, Maud has a life estate. I know she thinks she has a fee simple, but in reality, it's still going to be a life estate, okay? So then what happens next? Obviously, this farm wasn't nearly as important to Maud as they thought it was, because she basically mortgaged it for $50, and then she defaulted, right? So the sale was made, a share sale when the land goes into foreclosure, and it was sold to was it Ella? Okay. And then eventually the land, sometimes by 1955, it goes to Paradise. Okay. Then in 1957, I'll bring this all down. So then in 1957, they discover the deed. Okay, and in 1972, Maud dies. All right, so let me ask you this question, Kevin. Kevin, when the deed is discovered in 1957, who actually owns the land? I know Paradise is living on it, but who actually has titles of the land at that point?
I guess whoever still has a life estate.
Good. Well, let's be precise. Paradise owns the land, though, But with what duration? Of who? Yes. So this is the tricky part, right? Paradise owns it as long as Maud is alive. This is the rub of the life estate. All Maud had was a life estate. When she mortgaged the land, she mortgaged her life estate. Now, remember, no one ever wants a life estate. Because once the person dies, you lose everything, right? Everyone get this? So at this point, the Paradises own it for the duration of Maud's life. And then, Monica, what happens once Maud dies? Where's it go? Not Maud's heirs. Let's go back to the very beginning. Let's look at the initial grant, right? Who gets it? Of whose children? Yeah, not her heirs, a different thing, right? It goes back to Maud's children. So once Maud dies, the life estate ends. And basically the original 1922 deed, which was still in effect, the land jumps back to Maud's kids. It's a crazy case, right? So after Maud dies, the life estate ends, and the Maud's children get the remainder. Yeah.
If Paradise would have recorded the deed, and since Maud did not record, would that make a difference?
Well, let's be precise. Was a 1928 deed recorded? Was this one recorded? The answer is yes. Okay. The 1928 deed was recorded. But the Paradises have known about this 1928 deed. Okay. Was there anything in the 1928 deed to tip them off about the 1922 deed? Or was it? What do you think, Aleda? Yeah, so here's the rub. The 1928 deed, right, said something like, we're doing this because the 1922 deed was misplaced. If you are Paradise and you're doing a search and you find the 1928 deed and it makes this reference this other deed, you're thinking, uh-oh, something's up, right? There's something missing in the chain. Maybe what I'm getting is not what I think I'm getting. It specifically basically says, we're giving her a fee simple because the other one was destroyed. That like raises my spider sense, like, wait a minute, this isn't right. Something's wrong about this. Okay? So in this sense, it's not actually unfair. Paradise should have been on some sort of record notice, or perhaps inquiry notice, that maybe the title wasn't good.
So if you lose it, then how can you take a look at it?
You don't buy the property, right? You buy at your own risk. If you're Paradise and you find that there's this doubt hanging about it, your options are not to buy it. That you buy it anyway, you're taking a risk. Right? So effectively, the 1928 deed was constructive notice of an earlier deed. And
let's say if Maud did that purposely, would that be fraud then?
Maud did what purposely? Lose it?
If she knew that she only owned it in life estate, they said she lost it, and so everybody else could,
she may have actually believed she only did in fee simple. I'm guessing at this point she thought because she got it from Susan's heir, she had it clean. So a fraud case might be a little hard, but maybe. Right? Interesting case, right? And the very end, it goes back to Maud's kids because she only had a life estate to begin with. She lived too long. Right, and let's look at a slightly different one, right? What happens if Maud would have died before 1955? It would have gone back to the kids even earlier. Right? In other words, the sheriff's sale was only selling a life estate. That's all that was sold based on Maud's life. Or life estate par autre vie, if you remember that from last year. That's my French for the day. All right. Other questions? Okay. So briefly, title insurance, right? The purpose of title insurance is to make sure that this kind of stuff doesn't happen, right? You don't want to be in a situation where you're buying a piece of property, right, and you find out years later that something really, really wrong had happened. So a way to prevent this is to actually buy insurance from a title company. They will do the title search for you, right? And if they mess up, they'll pay you. So in Texas, there's actually a fairly standard rate for it, right? So say if the value of the property is $50,000. Title insurance costs $500, right? So it's basically 1% of the cost. But paying $500 for $50,000 property, you're guaranteeing the title's good. And for example, like a $100,000 property, it's about $800. So it's a sliding scale. The more expensive the property, the higher the cost of the title insurance. Okay. All right. That's all I really have for today. Any questions? No? All right. I will see you next class. Take care. And please bring the roll back up.